editing our pivot table options. Once again, if I click inside the pivot table and I go into the Options tab, I want to have a quick look at this first section here called Pivot Table. Here we have the pivot table name, and you can click in here and you can call it whatever you wish. So for example, I might decide to call this Products by Region. So when I click away and I click back inside this pivot table, I can see that the name of the pivot table is Products by Region. This can be quite handy if you have a lot of pivot tables on the one workbook or even in the one sheet. Instead of having to kind of click to see where you are and the pivots are called Pivot Table 1, Pivot Table 2, by giving them a proper name, it just means that you can check for sure that you're in the correct pivot table before you do anything. Also, there's a drop-down menu here called Options, and if I click on this, it brings up firstly the name of the pivot table, and then layout and format options, totals and filter options, display options, printing options, data options, and alt tab options. Let's first look at the layout and format. Here it says that it will merge and center cells with labels. We can go in and we can display the fields in the report down and then over. If there are error values coming in, instead of showing the error values, you can leave it, for example, with a space, or you can say put in a 0. This is very handy, particularly if we were doing the calculation fields up here like we saw in an earlier lesson. Sometimes show value as, when you choose particular options in there, NA values or not applicable values will come up in the table, and they're considered errors. So instead of seeing the errors, you can replace the errors with, for example, a space bar or something like that, so that you don't see the NAs coming in. Another one that we like to do is to turn off, for example, the Autofit column widths on update. This just means every time you make a filter change, your screen itself doesn't start resizing in widths and things like that, that the actual width of the columns will stay the same. And you don't necessarily want to change the cell formatting on updates, so leaving that turned on means it preserves the cell format on updates. So there's a couple of changes that you might make there. Totals and filters, it's seeing here that it's showing the totals for rows and columns. You can turn them off if you want. You can allow multiple filters for a field if you want, and also allow the sorting to happen when custom lists are involved. You can sort by the custom list. Display has a few extra options here also that you can apply, and printing has things like repeating the row labels on each printed page or to set print titles, etc. So these are just some of the options that you can change inside Pivot Table Options. With the Data tab, you've got Save the Source Data with the file. This may be important if you're copying and pasting the pivot table into another workbook. You can save the source data with the file, meaning that it will always link the two workbooks together. So there's a couple of extra bits that you might decide to read down through here. Normally, you would leave most of the settings the same, but the odd ones, like the error value option, is a very handy option here, and so too is the Autofit column widths, and they're both on the very first tab called Layout and Format. So once you've decided to make your changes, you can press the OK button, and now you're back into your pivot table.